I have my Hooded Merganser here. I've skinned everything, the wings, the legs, and I've started skinning on the neck. So I'm going to show you what I do to leave the real head attached when doing a Hooded Merganser. I like to use sawdust or borax for grip, and I'm just going to slowly start inverting that head. Their neck is a lot larger. You're able to skin the head right over the skull without any issues. And that's why I like this method. Here's the base of our jaw. You can tell by this little tendon here that's sticking out. It's part of the back of the jaw, and that'll tell you that you're right close to the ear canal. And we want to make sure that when we're going in that ear canal, we go in as deep as possible. You can see I started to cut into the ear there, because if we cut too close to the skin and not deep enough into that channel there in the head, our ear hole is going to be a lot bigger and it'll be harder to cover up once we're mounting our bird. So make sure you pay attention to that. And then we'll just keep skinning down the head. Same concept with the eyes. Similar to the ears, we want to stay a little farther back. Normally we'd want to be cutting along this line right here with the membrane. Since we're getting to this canal here with the eye socket, I'm going to stay a little farther back, as I'd rather cut into the eye itself rather than cut into the skin and cut a larger hole. It'll give you issues when you're trying to tuck your eyes and set them later on. And I'm just working back and forth and back and forth. Make sure I don't cause any unnecessary strain or pressure on the skin. So I've gone through one eye there. Now I'd say once we get about ½ inch to ¼ inch away from the eye, the skin's going to start getting a little more tight and harder to skin away from the skull. And that's telling me that we're about to a stopping point, as we don't want to break the skin free from the actual bill itself. We want to leave it all attached. So once that skin really starts tightening up and is not pulling away as free, it's telling you that you're close. And it's one of those things that you're just going to have to do a couple times to understand where that spot actually is. I've done several birds this way, and I just kind of know when I've hit my end point. So there's our skin, our skull. I've skinned down as far as I need to there. Go ahead and break free. You've got the tongue in here that we need to make sure we pull out. And then we're going to start cleaning meat off. Go ahead and pop the eyes out. When you do that, go from the underside and pull up. Don't try and pull them out. If there's a shot hole in there, just be careful which way that eye is pointed, because it'll splatter everywhere. Now at this point I'm going to use the real neck on this Hooded Merganser. It's a preference that I have, helps me get anatomy right and correct on these birds. You can cut the neck and sever it right there at the back of the skull, and then use foam and insert your wire, whatever you want to do for your neck. I'm just using the real neck for this process, which once we hit the wheel, I'll clean all this meat off. We'll keep the vertebrae and the tendons on there to keep everything intact, but there's no actual meat left on the bones. So now I'll go through the skull, and I'm just going to clean up as much meat on here as I can. I want to be careful around this jaw area. I don't want to separate the jaw so that it's disconnected or dislocated. We want to keep that connected to the top portion of the skull, so be careful as you start cleaning out around the ear canal area. You don't want to break that free. If you do, it's not a big deal. It's just a little bit harder to work with later on. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here and we'll get this all cleaned out. So I've got that about as clean as I need to. The rest I'll do on the wheel. Last thing we need to do is get the brains out, and I prefer to do this by going through the inside of the eye socket and cutting a hole. It helps if you use a sharp scalpel blade because it is pretty tough. And I just want to open that area up in there. Now, at this point, you can either take a spoon or some wires, pipe cleaner, toilet paper, whatever. You could smash it in there, pull the brains out. You could dig them out with a tool. I've gotten to the point I have a sprayer on my sink, and I'll just shoot a bunch of forced air or forced water in there and just clean that cavity out. But I just want to make sure that I have that all open so that when I do that, I get all the brain matter that's left in the skull. Then if you're going to use the real neck, I just separate the neck right where it's starting to bend there on the vertebrae going into the body. You can see right there, that's my main bend. Anything past that's connected to the body, so I want to separate right in that area. That way when I put this back on the form, the length of my neck is going to be accurate. So there's our carcass, there's our head and neck, ready for the wheel. I'll first start off, just to reaccustom myself with the wheel, I'll do the skull and the neck first, because I can be a little more rough. I just want to clean up any of these pockets of meat, any areas I didn't get while I was using my scissors or clippers. So you can see the meat's coming off of that neck, and we're just really going to get in there and get that cleaned. If you struggle with standing birds, especially the anatomy with the neck, and really when you're trying to do those low tucked poses, use the real neck and it'll help you out. Just be careful you don't start breaking through all the tendons on the neck. We need those to keep all the vertebrae attached. We're just trying to get all the meat out of there. Okay, so I've got my skull. Clean that up right there. Okay, I've got that cleaned up to where I want it. And then I've got the neck cleaned up. I might go over that just a little more after I finish the bird up. As you can see, like, I have natural bends there with the neck. But if I were to try and force that neck to go a different direction, it's not going to. So if we're doing a standing, tight bird, it's going to allow you to go where you're supposed to go with it. But if you try and do something weird, the neck locks up. This is really good if you're doing some preening poses and you need to be turning in the neck different or weird angles. Like, this will allow you to go the correct way. Something to consider. Now when I move on to the skin, I am not going to really flesh deep into this skin. I'm going to get the meat and the fat off, but I'm going to try and leave as much membrane connected to those feather quills. So you could say on my Hooded Mergansers I probably underflesh the head and crest area, but all that membrane is going to keep your feather quills locked in instead of allowing them to just go wherever they want if we open that tissue up too much. And the worst thing you can do on a Hooded Merganser is overflesh in the hood. So we're just getting the meat and the fat off. We're going to leave a lot of the membrane left on there. And that's really going to help have a tight look to that crest. And then we just need to be careful. You can see I have a shot hole right here. Be careful in those areas that you don't overflesh there and make that any worse. You see that there? So you can see I did not flesh very deep in that crest at all. And that's as much as I'm going to go. I want to keep everything locked in tight. And then when we're mounting this bird and we're grooming the crest, it's really going to help keep everything locked together and help you keep that shape. So I'm going to go through, finish fleshing this. Okay, I got my Hooded Merganser completely fleshed, washed, dried, and I've got this head about 90% dry. We'll finish drying it after we invert the head. Now before I do this, I'm going to take some borax and I'm going to put it on the outside of this head here. I go pretty heavy. It just helps the feathers roll around as we invert the head. Any moisture that comes out helps absorb that. I'm going to find the vertebrae that we cleaned up because it's still attached. And I'm going to invert that head. Now as soon as I get the head inverted, I want to make sure I get a bunch of borax on here. That way if there's any moisture that's been locked up in the head, it's not prone to leaking through. You got some shot damage right there. I don't want any moisture getting onto that crest. I'm going to tuck those feathers in there. I'm very generous with the borax, getting all over. If we're using the real neck, I'll be sure I get it all over that real neck as well. If not, you don't need to worry about this step. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 16 gauge wire. This is annealed. I'm going to be doing a swimming pose on this bird, so I don't need anything super heavy. I'm going to run up the center of that vertebrae and then out the skull, where we cut our hole there to clean out the brains. And we do have some marrow that's in those vertebrae. I'm just going to clean that off. I'm going to make a loop with my wire, pull it back in until that loop is inside that eye socket. Now what I'm going to do to lock this wire in is I'll make sure that loop is flat against the skull, and I've got some liquid super glue, and I'm going to glue next to the eye socket. Put some borax on it. I'm going to do a few layers of that. I want to make sure that wire is really locked in there. I don't want to be cranking on the head or turning it after I've inverted the head and I'm posing the bird and have that break free. Now at this point, I've got the wire locked in, allow the super glue a little bit to set. I want to go ahead and fill these eye sockets. And I like to use black epoxy sculpt, and I go heavy with the part B and fairly light with the part A. That way I have working time with this, but it still sets up over some time. On this other side where I didn't do the super glue and borax, I got a fairly deep eye pocket there. I'm going to fill this in. I just have some sculpting clay here in the shop. That way I'm not using a bunch of epoxy sculpt. Just put that in there, fill it about halfway, and then I'll use my epoxy sculpt for the actual setting of the eye and for tucking it. And I like the epoxy sculpt because it's tacky. That way when you're setting your eyes, the skin wants to adhere to it. Repeat on the other side. Then I'll go ahead and set my eyes at this point. I'm not going to push those in very deep. I'd rather them be a little buggy and then be able to push them in later than be trying to stick a pin in there afterwards trying to pull them out. So I've got my eyes set. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this neck in toilet paper real quick, and then we'll come back to getting ready to invert this head. Okay, we've got our neck wrapped with toilet paper. Put a little piece of backer rod there to give us a little oblong shape instead of just being round, because we don't want to build up too much on the back and then have an odd shaped neck. Now before I invert this head, I've got some white epoxy sculpt. I'm going to fill in there on the back. And this is important for these birds here. We want to get a little bit on the crest. What that's going to do is when you're adjusting the crest, this is just sticky enough that when the skin touches it, it's going to lock in. If you've ever tried to do caulking or something inside the head, you'll notice that it tends to pull that skin down. And I'm just going to put a little bead right there, kind of in the cheek area, bottom of that jaw. And once we have this head inverted, we can do some adjusting. We can shape some of this clay after the skin's pulled over, because right now it doesn't entirely want to stick to the skull. So we're going to get it as close as we can. You can see how sticky that is, though. It just wants to stay on my fingers, which is going to be great when we're working with this crest. Okay, make sure your fingers are cleaned off. You don't have any glue or epoxy, anything that could compromise the feathers. Then I'm just going to make sure my eye set's still on. Make sure your neck's not twisted, skin's in the right direction. I'm going to throw a little more borax here on the skin. And we're just going to slowly start working that skin back over the head. And then as soon as I get the skin over the back of that skull, I now start working it from the outside. And I'm just going all the way around, a little here, a little there, because I don't want to put any stress on the feathers. And then we'll just pull through. Okay, I've got my bird all sewn up. I got my support wire in. I'm going to set the eyes really quick. So I'll start by taking a little bit of raw cotton. We sell this here at Rocky Mountain Materials. I'm just going to open up this eye socket, the opening, and put a little cotton just down there in the cheek. And then if I'm happy with how that's filled out right there, just got a little tucking tool. I have a little dental tool that I bought. And I'm going to tuck and get the shape on that eye that I'm looking for. And then what's nice, drop a pin in there if you need to, because we just have a bunch of clay here in that eye socket. Okay, I've got my eyes set, went ahead and carded the tail, did a little grooming here and setting on the wings. So now we're ready to start working on the crest. Now I like to take 100% silicone, and since we have this opening here with the mouth, we can just go straight in. And I'm not going to do a lot. I'm not trying to fill this. I'm doing it as an adhesive. And you need to be careful when you do that. Make sure you don't have any shot damage in the neck. There's nothing worse than getting silicone or caulking blown out in the neck.
Now after I've put my silicone in, I'm going to use a little raw cotton to put down in the throat. And this is going to help keep that silicone down inside the neck. We don't want to be working the skin and having that silicone get worked back up and get on feathers outside of the mouth. So I'm going to just push that silicone in with my finger on the neck, and I'll start with my tweezers working the skin and trying to smooth out any wrinkles or ripples that are in the neck. As you know, there's a lot of extra skin on these mergansers, so we want to take our time to make sure it looks good and we don't have any lumps. So for the next few minutes, I'm just going to use my tweezers, make adjustments, be pulling the skin up and down, to the front, to the back, until I start getting that shape and the look that I want for this bird. And if you feel your skin isn't quite holding like you would like, you can go ahead and add a little more silicone into the neck. Just remember, it's an adhesive, not a filler. Now you can see I'm starting to get a smooth look there on this neck as I've been working it around. Just take your time and be patient with it. Now I'm ready to start working on the crest. I like to take some compressed air and quickly go over the head just to loosen things up and kind of help groom it. And then I'm going to take my tweezers and I'm going to separate the two halves of that crest in the white portion. We're just going to open those feathers up so they're not overlapping. And that's going to help us give a nice, full, clean look as we're attempting to groom this crest on this bird. Now don't get discouraged if you're working on a hooded merganser and the crest just does not want to line up, or it seems like it's fighting you at every angle. This bird was difficult to work with, but as you can see, I've taken a lot of time and I've been very patient in trying to get things lined up and cleaned up on this crest. Now I have my tweezers. I'm just carefully and slowly lining up those black feathers on the back of the crest. I want the lines to be as clean and as sharp as possible. And if you have to spend some extra time to do it, that's okay. Sometimes when I'm mounting birds, I'll spend an extra hour or so on a specific bird just to try and learn and understand the anatomy of the bird a little more. Now I have this bird pretty well finished up. I'm going to do a little more grooming to clean up and sharpen some lines. It also has a turtle shell that's going to be going in its mouth once I have this bird done. But I hope this method helps you and gives you a new way to work on these birds.